Indigo. By Satyajit Ray. My name is Anirudh Bose. I am 29 years old and a bachelor. For the last 8 years I've been working in an advertising agency in Calcutta. With the salary I get I live in reasonable comfort in a flat in Sardar Shankar Road. The flat has 2 south-facing rooms and is on the ground floor. 2 years ago I bought an ambassador car which I drive myself. I do a bit of writing in my spare time. 3 of my stories have been published in magazines and have been well appreciated by my acquaintances, but I know I cannot make a living by writing alone. For the last few months I haven't been writing at all. Instead, I have read a lot about indigo plantations in Bengal and Bihar in the 19th century. I am something of an authority on the subject now, how the British exploited the poor peasants, how the peasants rose in revolt, and how, finally, with the invention of synthetic indigo in Germany, the cultivation of indigo was wiped out from our country. All this I know by heart. It is to describe the terrible experience which instilled in me this interest in indigo that I have taken up my pen today. At this point I must tell you something about my past. My father was a well-known physician in Munger, a town in Bihar. That is where I was born and that is where I did my schooling in a missionary school. I have a brother 5 years older than me. He studied medicine in England and is now attached to a hospital in a suburb of London called Golders Green. He has no plans to return to India. My father died when I was 16. Soon after his death, my mother and I left Munger and came to Calcutta, where we stayed with my maternal uncle. I went to St. Xavier's College and took my bachelor's degree. Soon after that I got my job with the advertising agency. My uncle's influence helped, but I wasn't an unworthy candidate myself. I had been a good student, I spoke English fluently, and most of all, I had the ability to carry myself well in an interview. My early years in Munger had instilled certain habits in me which I have not been able to give up. One of these was an overpowering desire to go far away from the hectic life of Calcutta from time to time. I had done so several times ever since I bought my car. On weekends I made trips to Diamond Harbour, Port Canning, and Hassanabad along the Dum Dum Road. Each time I had gone alone because, to be quite honest, I didn't really have a close friend in Calcutta. That is why Pramod's letter made me so happy. Pramod had been my classmate in Munger. After I came away to Calcutta, we continued to keep in touch for 3 or 4 years. Then, perhaps it was I who stopped writing. Suddenly the other day when I came back from work, I found a letter from Pramod waiting for me on my desk. He had written from Dumka, I have a job in the forest department here. I have my own quarters. Why don't you take a week's leave and come over? Some leave was due to me, so I spoke to my boss, and on the 27th of April 1st shall remember the date as long as I live. I packed my bags and set off for Dumka. Pramod hadn't suggested that I go by car, it was my idea. Dumka was 200 miles away, so it would take about 5 or 6 hours at the most. I decided to have a big breakfast, set off by 10 and reach there before dusk. At least that was the plan, but there was a snag right at the start. I had my meal and was about to put a pawn into my mouth, when my father's old friend Uncle Mohit suddenly turned up. He is a grave old man whom I was meeting after 10 years. So there was no question of giving him short shrift. I had to offer him tea and listen to him chat for over an hour. I saw Uncle Mohit off and shoved my suitcase and bedding into the back seat of my car. Just then, my ground-floor neighbor Bola Babu walked up with his 4-year-old son Pintu in tow. "Where are you off to all by yourself?" Bola Babu asked. When I told him, he said with some concern, "But that's a long way. Shouldn't you have arranged for a driver?" I said I was a very cautious driver myself, and that I had taken such care of my car that it was still as good as new, so there's nothing to worry about. Bola Babu wished me luck and went into the house. I glanced at my wristwatch before turning the ignition key. It was 10 minutes past 11. Although I avoided Howrah and took the Bali Bridge Road, it took me an hour and a half to reach Chandernagore. Driving through dingy towns, these first 30 miles were so dreary that the fun of a car journey was quite lost. But from there on, as the car emerged into open country, the effect was magical. Where in the city did one get to see such a clear blue sky free from chimney smoke, and breathe air so pure and so redolent of the smell of earth? At about 12:30, as I was nearing Burdwan, I began to feel the consequence of having eaten so early. Hungry, I pulled up by the station which fell on the way, went into a restaurant and had a light meal of toast, omelette and coffee. Then I resumed my journey. I still had 135 miles to go. 20 miles from Burdwan, there was a small town called Panagar. There I had to leave the Grand Trunk Road and take the road to Ulambazar. From Lambazar the road went via Suri and Massanjor to Dumka. The military camp at Panagar had just come into view when there was a bang from the rear of my car. I had a flat tire. I got down. I had a spare tire and could easily fit it. The thought that other cars would go whizzing by, their occupants laughing at my predicament, was not a pleasant one. Nevertheless, I brought out the jack from the boot and set to work. By the time I finished putting the new tire on, I was dripping with sweat. My watch showed 2:30. It had turned muggy in the meantime. The cool breeze which was blowing even an hour ago, and was making the bamboo trees sway, had stopped. Now everything was still. As I got back into the car I noticed a blue-black patch in the west above the treetops. Clouds. Was a storm brewing up? A nor'wester? It was useless to speculate. I must drive faster. I helped myself to some hot tea from the flask and resumed my journey. But before I could cross Lambazar, I was caught in the storm. I had enjoyed such nor'westers in the past, sitting in my room, and had even recited Tagore poems to myself to blend with the mood. I had no idea that driving through open country, such a nor'wester could strike terror into the heart. Claps of thunder always make me uncomfortable. They seem to show a nasty side of nature, a vicious assault on helpless humanity. It seemed as if the shafts of lightning were all aimed at my poor ambassador, and one of them was sure to find its mark sooner or later. In this precarious state I passed Suri and was well on my way to Massanjor when there was yet another bang which no one could mistake for a thunderclap. I realized that another of my tires had decided to call it a day. I gave up hope. It was now pouring with rain. My watch said 5:30. For the last 20 miles I had had to keep the speedometer down to 15, or I would have been well past Massanjor by now. Where was I? Up ahead nothing was visible through the rain-swept windscreen. The wiper was on but its efforts were more frolicsome than effective. It being April, the sun should still be up, but it seemed more like late evening. I opened the door on my right slightly and looked out. What I saw didn't suggest the presence of a town, though I could make out a couple of buildings through the trees. There was no question of getting out of the car and exploring, but one thing was clear enough: there were no shops along the road as far as the eye could see. And I had no more spare tires. After waiting in the car for a quarter of an hour, it struck me that no other vehicle had passed by in all this time. Was I on the right road? There had been no mistake up to Suri, but suppose I had taken a wrong turning after that? It was not impossible in the blinding rain. But even if I had made a mistake, it was not as if I had strayed into the jungles of Africa or South America. Wherever I was, there was no doubt that I was still in the district of Birbhum, within 50 miles of Santiniketan, and as soon as the rain stopped my troubles would be over. I might even find a repair shop within a mile or so. I pulled out a packet of wills from my pocket and lit a cigarette. I recalled Bola Babu's warning. He must have gone through the same trying experience, or how could he have given me such sound advice? In future honk. 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 I turned round and saw a truck standing behind. Why was it blowing its horn? Was I standing right in the middle of the road? The rain had let up a little. I opened the door, got out and found that it was no fault of the truck. When my tire burst, the car had swerved at an angle and was now blocking most of the road. There was no room for the truck to pass. "Take the car to one side, sir." The Sikh driver had by now come out of the truck. "What's the matter?" he asked. "A puncture?" I shrugged to convey my state of helplessness. "If you could lend a hand," I said, "we could move the car to one side and let you pass." The Sikh driver's helper came out too. The three of us pushed the car to one side of the road. Then I found out from the two men that I was indeed on the wrong road for Dumka. I had taken a wrong turning and would have to drive back 3 miles to get back on the right track. I also learnt that there were no repair shops nearby. The truck went on its way. As its noise faded away, the truth struck me like a hammer blow. I had reached a dead end. There was no way I could reach Dumka that night, and I had no idea how and where I would spend the night. The roadside puddles were alive with the chorus of frogs. The rain had now been reduced to a light drizzle. I got back into the car and was about to light a second cigarette when I spotted a light through the window on my side. I opened the door again. Through the branches of a tree I saw a rectangle of orange light. A window. Just as smoke meant the presence of fire, a kerosene lamp meant the presence of a human being. There was a house nearby and there were occupants in it. I got out of the car with my torch. The window wasn't too far away. I had to go and investigate. There was a narrow footpath branching off from the main road which seemed to go in the direction of the house with the window. I locked the car and set off. I made my way avoiding puddles as far as possible. As I passed a tamarind tree, the house came into view. Well, hardly a house. It was a small cottage with a corrugated tin roof. Through an open door I could see a hurricane lantern and the leg of a bed. "Is anybody there?" I called out. A stocky, middle-aged man with a thick mustache came out of the room and squinted at my torch. I turned the spot away from his face. "Where are you from, sir?" the man asked. In a few words I described my predicament. "Is there a place here where I can spend the night?" I asked. "I shall pay for it, of course." "In the Dak bungalow, you mean?" "Dak bungalow?" I didn't see any Dak bungalow. But immediately, I realized my mistake. I had followed the light of the lantern, and had therefore failed to look around. Now I turned the torch to my left and immediately a large bungalow came into view. "You mean that one?" I asked. "Yes, sir, but there is no bedding. And you can't have meals there." "I'm carrying my own bedding," I said. "I hope there's a bed there." "Yes, sir." "A charpoy. And I see there's a stove lit in your room. You must be cooking your own meal." The man broke into a smile and asked if I would care for coarse chapatis prepared by him and urad kadal cooked by his wife. I said it would do very nicely. I liked all kinds of chapatis, and urad was my favorite dal. I don't know what the bungalow must have been like in its heyday, but now it was hardly what one understood by a dak bungalow. Constructed during the time of the Raj, the bedroom was large and the ceiling was high. The furniture consisted of a charpoy, a table set against the wall on one side, and a chair with a broken arm. The chowkidar, or the caretaker, had in the meantime lit a lantern for me. He now put it on the table. "What is your name?" I asked. "Sukanram, sir." "Has anybody ever lived in this bungalow or am I the first one?" "Oh, no sir, others have come too. There was a gentleman who stayed here for 2 nights last winter." "Tilope, there are no ghosts here," I said in a jocular tone. "God forbid," he said. "No one has ever complained of ghosts." I must say I found his words reassuring. If a place is spooky, and old dak bungalows have a reputation for being so, it will be so at all times. "When was this bungalow built?" I asked. Sukan began to unroll my bedding and said, "This used to be a sahib's bungalow, sir." "A sahib?" "Yes, sir. An indigo planter. There used to be an indigo factory close by. Now only the chimney is standing. I knew indigo was cultivated in these parts at one time. I had seen ruins of indigo factories in Munger too in my childhood. It was 10:30 when I went to bed after dining on Sukhan's coarse chapatis and urad kadal. I had sent a telegram to Pramod from Calcutta saying that I would arrive this afternoon. He would naturally wonder what had happened. But it was useless to think of that now. All I could do now was congratulate myself on having found a shelter, and that too without much trouble. In future I would do as Bola Babu had advised. I had learnt a lesson, and lessons learnt the hard way are not forgotten easily. I put the lantern in the adjoining bathroom. The little light that seeped through the door which I had kept slightly ajar was enough. Usually I find it difficult to sleep with a light on, and yet I did not extinguish the light even though what I badly needed now was sleep. I was worried about my car which I had left standing on the road, but it was certainly safer to do so in a village than in the city. The sound of drizzle had stopped. The air was now filled with the croaking of frogs and the shrill chirping of crickets. From my bed in that ancient bungalow in this remote village, the city seemed to belong to another planet. Indigo. I thought of the play by Dinabandhu Mitra, Nilderpan, The Mirror of Indigo. As a college student I had watched a performance of it in a theatre on Cornwallis Street. I didn't know how long I had slept, when a sound suddenly awakened me. Something was scratching at the door. The door was bolted. Must be a dog or a jackal, I thought, and in a minute or so the noise stopped. I shut my eyes in an effort to sleep, but the barking of a dog put an end to my efforts. This was not the bark of a stray village dog, but the unmistakable bay of a hound. I was familiar with it. 2 houses away from us in Munger lived Mr. Martin. He had a hound which bayed just like this. Who on Karth kept a pet hound here? I thought of opening the door to find out as the sound seemed quite near. But then I thought, why bother? It was better to get some more sleep. What time was it now? A faint moonlight came in through the window. I raised my left hand to glance at the wristwatch, and gave a start. My wristwatch was gone. And yet, because it was an automatic watch, I always wore it to bed. Where did it disappear? And how? Were there thieves around? What would happen to my car then? I felt beside my pillow for my torch and found it gone too. I jumped out of bed, knelt on the floor and looked underneath it. My suitcase too had disappeared. My head started spinning. Something had to be done about it. I called out, "Chowkidar." There was no answer. I went to the door and found that it was still bolted. The window had bars. So how did the thief enter? As I was about to unfasten the bolt, I glanced at my hand and experienced an odd feeling. Had whitewash from the wall got onto my hand? Or was it white powder? Why did it look so pale? I had gone to bed wearing a vest, why then was I now wearing a long-sleeved silk shirt? I felt a throbbing in my head. I opened the door and went out into the veranda. Chowkidar. The word that came out was spoken with the unmistakable accent of an Englishman. And where was the Chowkidar, and where was his little cottage? There was now a wide open field in front of the bungalow. In the distance was a building with a high chimney. The surroundings were unusually quiet. They had changed. And so had one. I came back into the bedroom in a sweat. My eyes had got used to the darkness. I could now clearly make out the details. The bed was there, but it was covered with a mosquito net. One hadn't been using one. The pillow too was unlike the one I had brought with me. This one had a border with frills, mine didn't. The table and the chair stood where they did, but they had lost their aged look. The varnished wood shone even in the soft light. On the table stood not a lantern but a kerosene lamp with an ornate shade. There were other objects in the room which gradually came into view, a pair of steel trunks in a corner, a folding bracket on the wall from which hung a coat, an unfamiliar type of headgear and a hunting crop. Below the bracket, standing against the wall, was a pair of galoshes. I turned away from the objects and took another look at myself. Till now I had only noticed the silk shirt, now I saw the narrow trousers and the socks. I didn't have shoes on, but saw a pair of black boots on the floor by the bed. I passed my right hand over my face and realized that not only my complexion but my features too had changed. I didn't possess such a sharp nose, nor such thin lips or narrow chin. I felt the hair on my head and found that it was wavy and that there were sideburns which reached below my ears. In spite of my surprise and terror, I suddenly felt a great urge to find out what I looked like. But where to find a mirror? I strode towards the bathroom, opened the door with a sharp push and went in. There had been nothing there but a bucket. Now I saw a metal bathtub and a mug kept on a stool beside it. The thing I was looking for was right in front of me, an oval mirror fixed to a dressing table. I looked into it, but the person reflected in it was not me. By some devilish trick I had turned into a 19th-century Englishman with a sallow complexion, blonde hair and light eyes from which shone a strange mixture of hardness and suffering. How old would the Englishman be? No more than 30, but it looked as aged him prematurely if either illness or hard work, or both, had been. I went closer and had a good look at my face. As I looked, deep sigh rose from the depths of my heart. The voice was not mine. The sigh, too, expressed not my feelings but those of the Englishman. What followed made it clear that all my limbs were acting of their own volition. And yet it was surprising that I, Anirudh Bose, was perfectly aware of the change in identity. But I didn't know if the change was permanent, or if there was any way to regain my lost self. I came back to the bedroom. Now I glanced at the table. Below the lamp was a notebook bound in leather. It was open at a blank page. Beside it was an inkwell with a quill pen dipped in it. I walked over to the table. Some unseen force made me sit in the chair and pick up the pen with my right hand. The hand now moved towards the left-hand page of the notebook, and the silent room was filled with the noise of a quill scratching the blank page. This is what I wrote. 27 April, 1868. Those fiendish mosquitoes are singing in my ears again. So that's how the son of a mighty empire has to meet his end at the hands of a tiny insect. What strange will of God is this? Eric has made his escape. Percy and Tony too left earlier. Perhaps I was greedier than them. So in spite of repeated attacks of malaria I couldn't resist the lure of indigo. No, not only that. One mustn't lie in one's diary. My countrymen know me only too well. I didn't lead a blameless life at home either, and they surely have not forgotten that. So I do not dare go back home. I know I will have to stay here and lay down my life on this alien soil. My place will be beside the graves of my wife Mary and my dear little son Toby. I have treated the natives here so badly that there is no one to shed a tear at my passing away. Perhaps Mirjan would miss me, my faithful trusted hearer Mirjan. And Rex? My real worry is about Rex. Alas, faithful Rex. When I die, these people will not spare you. They will either stone you or club you to death. If only I could do something about you. I could write no more. The hands were shaking. Not mine, the diarist's. I put down the pen. Then my right hand dropped and moved to the right and made for the handle of the drawer. I opened it. Inside there was a pin cushion, a brass paperweight, a pipe and some papers. The drawer opened a little more. A metal object glinted in the half-light. It was a pistol, its butt inlaid with ivory. The hand pulled out the pistol. It had stopped shaking. A group of jackals cried out. It was as if in answer to the jackal's cry that the hound bayed again. I left the chair and advanced towards the door. I went out into the veranda. The field in front was bathed in moonlight. About 10 yards from the veranda stood a large greyhound. He wagged his tail as he saw me. Rex. It was the same deep English voice. The echo of the call came floating back from the faraway factory and bamboo grove. Rex. Rex. Rex came up towards the veranda. As he stepped from the grass onto the cement, my right hand rose to my waist, the pistol pointing towards the hound. Rex stopped in his tracks, his eye on the pistol. He gave a low growl. My right forefinger pressed the trigger. As the gun throbbed with a blinding flash, smoke and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Rex's lifeless, blood-spattered body lay partly on the veranda and partly on the grass. The sound of the pistol had wakened the crows in the nearby trees. A hubbub now rose from the direction of the factory. I came back into the bedroom, bolted the door and sat on the bed. The shouting drew near. I placed the still hot muzzle of the pistol by my right ear. That is all I remember. I woke up at the sound of knocking. "I've brought your tea, sir." Daylight flooded in through the window. Out of sheer habit my eyes strayed to my left wrist. 13 minutes past 6. I brought the watch closer to my eyes to read the date, April the 28th. I now opened the door and let Sukanram in. "There's a car repair shop half an hour down the road, sir," he said. "It'll open at 7. "Very good," I said, and proceeded to drink my tea. Would anyone believe me when they heard of my experience on the night of the 100th anniversary of the death of an English indigo planter in Birbhum?